Hello, I'm Adam Thompson, the designer and developer of First Earth, and I'm going to show you what I've been working on. I'm going to start by showing you on screen what I was talking about last week with the water being under the land and with the loading. So I'm able to switch to my screen now, so I'm going to do that. And I'll load up into the game here. Over here you can see the zones that are currently loaded. Right now there's 4 here on the right. And I'll get back to that in a sec. Okay, but if we look in game, here I'm by some water right now. So what I'll do is I'll show you how this water actually works in the engine. So if you look on the right side here, you'll see the water. And what I can do is I can disable the display of the terrain. So now what you're seeing is just the water without the terrain around it. So if I toggle that a few times, you'll kind of see where the water goes. So see how the water's there, and then see there's a lot more water underneath that you don't see. And if I take the camera down here, you can kind of see underneath the land there's all this water. So the concept is that that's the easiest way for me to fill up an area with water. Yeah. So the other thing I want to show you is the zone loading. So if I take my character here and I run the right direction, I will hit a new zone. I have a super run here I'll use a little bit. Eventually, there we go. So now this is the new zone loading. It's a little bit buggy because I'm running so fast, but so you'll see there's a zone boundary right about here. You can see it because the water is still buggy at zone boundaries. So if I cross this, you'll see me zone again, and you'll see it's very fast now. If you're a tester, you'll see this is much faster than it used to be. And over on the right, you'll see what's going on. So over on the right, you can see there's 6 objects here. And if I go across this zone, 2 of them got grayed out, these 2. And what that means is that they're still loaded, but they're just not displayed. So your frame rate's still high, and if you cross back over, they don't have to reload or re-download or anything. It just switches them back on. You can also kind of see it happening over in this side window here. So that is zone loading. So let me switch back to myself. Good. Close that. Switch back to my notes. Let me talk about animals and what I've been doing. So currently I've added deer to the game, and you saw one there for a second. So currently deer have a random spawn. There's a maximum number of deer per zone, and there's a breed rate. So the more deer there are, the faster they spawn. And this applies to all animals. So I actually already added wolves in the engine, but I don't have a wolf model yet. But when I have a model, I'll just plug it in. They're already set up to work. I had to deal with a few things there in solving that. One was solving what I call game time versus real time. So 2 hours pass in the game, or I'm sorry, for every 2 real world hours, that's 24 hours inside the game. So in other words, there's a sunrise there's a sunrise in the game every 2 real hours. And it's pretty confusing talking about this. So what I've started to do is say game time and real time. So I'll say, 2 hours real time is 24 hours game time. And I have the deer spawn rate set up to operate sort of at game time. So deer are birthing at about the rate that they would in game. There's actually a third type of time, which I'm calling progress rate. And how this works is, so imagine that you have this game where you can invent things and your civilization can progress and you can use up resources. Well, we can't have it move at real time, obviously, because it takes thousands of years for civilizations to advance. It takes decades for things to be invented. It would be a boring game. And I can't just move it at the speed that I move day, sunrise and sunset in the game, because that's still too slow. That's 12 times real time. So it's like 12 times speed. Still too slow, too boring. So what I'm calling progress rate is how fast civilization and the world inventions and production progress compared to the real world. And I'm not going to tell you the number, but it's much higher. So over a couple years in game, we should be seeing significant advances in civilization. And I actually have deer spawning at sort of that rate, because if you're producing hides or something from deer, you'll need to be able to utilize them at that rate. Let me look at my other notes here. On the forum, the janitor, my member, the janitor, brought up a problem in the game Worm, which is a sandbox game. And he said that the problem there was that players could pen in animals in like a pen to herd them or to farm them. And when that happened, all the concentrated animals there would be so many animals in the area there that no animals could spawn in the wild anymore. And he worried about that in First Earth. And that in fact would happen right now because the number of animals is capped per area. But I don't want that sort of thing to happen. So I'll make sure that that spawning is realistic so that if there's concentrated animals in a small area, it doesn't affect animals in another area. Part of that will be because property is all privately owned in First Earth. So if you're able to herd animals, it's like you own that area anyway. Let's see. Oh, and I wanted to thank the janitor very much for all his testing. He's been taking a ton of screenshots. If you go to the screenshot page on the website, and just testing constantly. So every time I release a build, he's in there. Thanks very much for helping with that. And thanks to all the testers too. I don't talk about it, but it's so helpful when I put out a build to have people go in, load in, and I see things that go wrong or performance problems. It really helps. Thank you. Someone named Jake on the forum asked about biomes and whether there'd be different types of animals in different areas, like savanna animals, things like that. And it's already kind of that way. So if I switch back to my screen and bring up my browser, this is the land type data that I'm using of the actual land in North America. And so there's these different types of land, like developed or like barren, forest, shrubland, herbaceous, and it breaks them down. And I have all that. That's all in the game, and it's represented by different color tiles that you see on the land. And that also influences what sort of trees spawn, and it influences now what sorts of animals spawn. That's already done this week. So I do sort of have biomes in this form, and as I start adding more and more animals and I'm able to get the models, we'll start seeing different animals in different biomes. Let me switch back to myself. Still getting used to that. And my notes. Oh yeah, I encountered a couple of kind of funny bugs that I want to show you. So let me open up Unity again, switch you back. Or actually, I don't even need Unity. I'll show you in my browser. So one of them was, if I go to my screenshot page here, which you should sort of monitor this page because there's awesome stuff coming up here from testers like the janitor, and also my dev screenshots go up on here. And sometimes I snap things that I think you guys might think are cool. So like here's one thing I was doing while I was testing deer. And you can see on this picture, you can see that I'm floating in the air with the deer. So what actually happened is that I was working on bounding boxes where you would collide with the deer, so you couldn't walk through deer. That may not be in this build, but so it was such that if you spawned inside of a deer, you could never get out because you were already colliding with it. So I saw that problem, so I switched back to my code, and I was kind of coding, working on that, and about 30 minutes later, I switched back to the game, which was still running, and I was up in the air about 10 feet with that deer, and I was like, that's impossible. Nothing in my game right now is in the air. Everything's on the ground. Nothing can get in the air. How did that happen? I wasn't even in there. What I found is that the deer's idle animation, where it lifts its head and stuff, had a slight translation on the y-axis, meaning that every time that animation looped around and repeated itself, the deer went up just a little bit. And over 30 minutes, it went up about 10 feet. And because I was stuck in the collision box, I went up with it. Funny bug. Another funny bug I had was that I ran the game one time and it crashed. And I couldn't tell why. Like, I had been running it and it was fine. And then one time I ran it and it crashed. And what I found out was that it was actually because the time on the server translated into a leap year in the actual sun, moon, sky system. So since, like I said, the server time travels at 12 times the speed of real time. And it just so happened that that time when I started the game, it was a leap year, and it was February 29th on a leap year. And the system, the weather system didn't support that because I had the year set to 2014, which is not a leap year. That's why it crashed. I thought that was a crazy bug. I fixed that. So one other thing I want to tell you about is kind of weird because it's philosophy, it's metaphysics. I've studied some philosophy, and it hardly ever comes up directly in game development, but here's what happened. So I was making deer, and I was thinking, well, how do I tell the game what type of animal it's dealing with? So, you know, there's deer, there's baby deer, there's maybe elk, there's lions. So I could have like something called type, and I could say, oh, if it's a deer, then have it wander gently. If it's a lion, then have it, you know, crawl around and growl. The problem there is that once you have a lot of animals, which I want to have a lot of everything someday, as I have time to add it. Once you have a lot, you have all these different types, and you have to program for each of them. So it'll be like, if it's a lion, do this. If it's an elk, do this. You know, if it's a bear, do this. And that much code would be buggy and overwhelming. And so the reason this is a philosophy problem is because in real life, objects aren't defined by type. In other words, if you have a water bottle like here, like I have here, there's no sort of water bottle type that's in the universe. The idea of a water bottle is something that we come up with conceptually in order to group together things of a similar type. In other words, we know what a water bottle is because we look at all the different types of bottles, we group them all together. Philosophy always uses the example of a table. You know, table isn't something that exists in the universe on its own until we think it up. We define table as something with 4 legs and a flat surface. And so what we're really seeing there is that the type that something is comes out of its properties. It's not that the properties come out of its type. So it's not that lions can get mad, deer can run at a certain speed, you know, antelope eat grass or whatever. It's rather that things that run at a certain speed and eat grass are deer. So how this actually applies to First Earth is that I was worried about, you know, how do I categorize things? Do I have like the type of this object is animal, the subtype is deer, the subtype is baby deer, and it's like, where do you draw the line of what when it's a subtype versus when it's a type? It was getting kind of crazy. So how I'm going to do it, the solution is I'm going to, just like in the real world, my types will be based on properties. So I've got a note here. If something reproduces at a certain rate and it wanders in my game right now, it's a deer. The only things in my game that reproduce and wander right now are deer. Now, when I add something else, like mountain lion, then that definition would apply to both mountain lions and deer, and I'd sort of lose my type there. So when I add things, I'll have to add a property and a recognition of that property. So a mountain lion will be aggressive. It'll have a certain aggressiveness. So things that reproduce, wander, and are aggressive will be mountain lions. Things that just reproduce and wander and are not aggressive will be deer. That's how I'm handling types. So the game engine will not store deer, the word deer, anywhere in it as far as storing the deer object. It'll just store its properties. Anyway, I think that's fascinating. Gonna wrap up this video. It's been a long one. I'll tell you what I'm doing right now. I've got to work on animal inverse kinematics and wandering and reaction. So inverse kinematics is right now the deer, you know, if I switch to my screen, if you look at the deer on the ground, you'll see that its feet aren't exactly touching the ground. And if you have it like, let me go back. Let me try to go back to my deer. I go back to this deer, you'll see that it's totally floating in the air. And the reason for that is that it's, it doesn't know where the ground is. It's just an object with an animation. So what I need to do is use inverse kinematics, which is a method of telling the animation where to go so that its feet will know to go on the ground, and I can make it, sort of rest on the ground. I think that's the only way to handle this. And then I also need to handle wandering. So the server will have all the deer wander around every once in a while. And reaction. So when the player gets within a certain distance of the deer has to, look up and be like, oh, here comes a player, and then decide whether to run or to chase them, depending on whether it's an aggressive animal or not. So in deer's case, I think in this build they just won't react, but later on they might run, and a wolf sort of animal might attack. That's it. Thanks for watching. I hope it was interesting.